Welcome to Wharton. I'm David Thornburg. I'm the Executive Director of the Fels Institute of Government here at Penn, which is Penn's graduate program in public policy and public management. And I'm delighted to see an almost full house. If there's anybody standing, guess not, but we have 4 or 5 seats here in the front of the room. And let's get underway. This, I think, will be a timely, a terrific, a lively, and energetic conversation about some of the most critical issues of the day. I'm going to introduce our panelists in a minute and also say a few more words about the program, but just one quick logistical note. Mayor Michael Nutter is on his way here. He asked us for about 10 more minutes, but I think we can certainly excuse that given the demands of managing the affairs of the 6th largest city in the country. So when he comes in, I'll introduce him beforehand, but when he comes in, he'll be primed and ready for action. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today. The topic at hand, as I said, is about as fundamental as you can get. Politics and the economy and the relationship between the two. And really, I think this particularly is relevant for Mayor Nutter, the challenge of our elected officials and governmental leaders in working us through both psychologically and substantively one of the most challenging economies as we've come to hear since the Great Depression. Although I would say for bits and pieces of the country, the early 1980s were no cakewalk as well, and we might sort of reflect back on that. But this is a time when these two strands of political leadership and economic policy and economic realities are probably more intertwined than probably most of our lifetimes. We have in play in Washington right now, but also now percolating down at state and local levels, probably the most ambitious response to try to, pick your metaphor, pump prime the economy, stabilize the economy, affect an economic recovery, put people back to work than we've seen in many, many years. So the challenges of political leadership in this context are really extraordinary, and I think that's going to be a theme that we keep coming back to again and again in this panel. We're really thrilled and honored and privileged to have a top-notch panel here today to talk through some of these issues. And let me give a brief introduction to the two who are here and Mayor Nutter, who's on his way. Frank Luntz is Chairman Emeritus of Luntz and Maslansky Strategic Research. You probably have seen him just about everywhere you turn as a commentator, a so-called pundit, and as someone who is one of the most knowledgeable people in this country about how language and the use of language influences the political debates. Bill Moyers, who's no slouch in that department himself, had this to say about Frank, that he's a magician with a gift for the politics of words and what words best connect with the hearts and minds of the public. He's a master of the form of the focus group and public opinion surveys, having conducted over 1,500 over the years. He works both for political clients and political campaigns and for corporate clients as well. You found out, those of you who came here a little earlier, that he also is a wonderful host, and he served 2/3 of you cookies before you walked in. 2 other little tidbits about Frank. One other description of him I particularly enjoyed, that someone described him as the Johnny Appleseed of language. So not only does he do cookies well, but he certainly sprinkles the world with words that work. The title of his much acclaimed book, Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. Then the other note about Frank is that early in his career, he spoke for 24 straight hours as part of the Oxford Union Society Guinness Book of World Records debate. So A, you don't want to get caught in a filibuster with Frank. And B, I suspect if we wanted to, we could just wind up and let him go, and that would be the program for the day. But we're delighted to have Frank here with us. Bob Gardner is founder and president of the Advocacy Group, a San Francisco-based firm specializing in corporate crisis and political communications. As Frank does, Bob has a long and very powerful legacy and impact in the world of communications, both on the political side and in the corporate side. Early on, he was chief speechwriter for Donald Rumsfeld at the Cost of Living Council. He was one of 4 ad executives involved in Jerry Ford's razor-tight presidential race in 1976. He helped run Dick Cheney's campaigns for Congress. And since then, we were talking earlier, he's been both involved in national level politics, California politics, which is a rare breed unto itself for those of you who live and work out there, and has also been an enormously influential, as someone said, ad guru for corporate clients around the country and around the world. And finally, in absentia, Michael Nutter is the city of Philadelphia's 98th mayor and was elected with an enviable margin of 83% last November. When the mayor gets here, I think we'll reflect a little bit about the change in circumstances even between his primary election and his general election, and certainly since then, and how the changing political tides have affected his ability to lead and communicate with people. He has been a whirlwind as a mayor. Rivals, for those of you know him, also Penn graduate Ed Rendell in terms of his ability to be 1,001 places at once, which probably accounts for why he's a little bit late. And has really just thrown himself into the job, brought fresh new talent, an enormous number of Penn graduates and Fells graduates into government, and we have enormous high hopes for him. So there's the preliminaries. Let me begin the discussion, and I'm largely going to play traffic cop here because you're really here to hear these folks as much as anything. But let me just throw out a proposition, gentlemen, and if we agree on that one, then we'll go on. The proposition is that the last presidential election turned out to be largely a reflection on the economy, the change in economic fortunes, and an enormous upwelling of desire for need for change. I think I reflect back to maybe early September after the Republican convention, post-Palin, pre-meltdown, when I believe Senator McCain was actually ahead in the polls for a brief moment. And then, as we know, things got really interesting. We agree on that point, or any finer point you want to put on that? 2-0 vote?
First off, who's here for the 25th? I have to be the only person in this room that actually has more hair now than back then. And unlike the rest of you, I actually have a receipt for it. I'm looking at Mr. Smith up there. You look like you've lost weight. I found it. If you go back to 2008, I don't believe it was about the economy. I believe it was about the past versus the future. And I believe you saw that in the primaries. You saw Barack Obama compare. Hillary Clinton was supposed to be the president. She was supposed to have won. She made a couple mistakes. She chose to live in Chappaqua, New York, which you all know is Indian for separate bedrooms. Her husband turned out to have been a nightmare for that campaign. She was so negative, whereas Barack Obama was positive, and he outworked her. He knocked on 300 doors the last day of the primary trying to find the final undecided voters. She knocked on the same 300 doors. She was just trying to find Bill. And on the Republican side, you got to admit, John McCain didn't need a vice president. He needed someone who knew CPR. The difference between Obama and McCain was that Obama, this is the biggest spread, by the way, statistically, so I can give you one piece of factual information. By the way, I came here from Nashville this morning. The mayor's coming from City Hall. He ought to fly U.S. Air in the future. Maybe we'll get here faster. And by the way, this did make me feel at home because the mayor is more than 30 minutes late, so I remember my years at Penn when the professors would show up this late. But at least hopefully the mayor won't show up having been to one of the bars nearby. We had the biggest, I told you guys not to invite me. We had the biggest spread, last point is that we had the biggest age spread that we've ever had. And John McCain, if I can grab it here, John McCain could not even operate one of these. John McCain did not know how to use a BlackBerry. You cannot be about the future. You cannot be about tomorrow when the American people were fed up with what had happened. And I'm sure there are a few Republicans here. And George Bush did well, considering English was his second language. You cannot get elected if you aren't representative of tomorrow. And Barack Obama was tomorrow. He was change, and John McCain, an American hero, was still yesterday, and to me, that's what the campaign was about.
So more today versus tomorrow rather than a reflection on the economy. Bob,
Yeah,
what's your
all
comment?
elections are change elections. Nobody wants to do, even if you're running for your second term as an incumbent for president or anything else, it's still, what am I going to do in the next 4 years? It's not, gee, had a great, 4 years can be a good base, but it's always about the future. It's always about change. And that was epitomized by the candidates. By the way, unlike Frank, I am a practitioner of the black arts, but I don't do stand-up. So, and I'm about as prepared for this as I was for my Penn finals.
Who says you don't do stand-up?
But it was about change, but to your point, McCain was ahead or tied until the meltdown, and had that not happened and had he not performed so incredibly badly during that period, and I have a lot of Republican insider friends who said how well Obama did. They remember they had a meeting at the White House. Both of them were there, both McCain and Obama, and apparently McCain, and that was a closed-door meeting, but apparently McCain was just terrible in that meeting and Obama really shined. And the partisans that are my friends that were in that meeting say that they were really impressed with him and they knew right away that he was going to do it.
Yeah. So let's roll forward to today and the Obama administration. Both of you are practitioners of the art of communication back and forth, and I think principle one of communication is you listen before you talk. So start with you, Bob. What's your sense, if you were kind of trying to capsulize the mood of the American people around the economy in particular, and how the president, his administration, and other folks like Mayor Nutter ought to be responding to that mood?
Well, in an ideal world, you're supposed to listen before you talk. It doesn't always happen. But in this case, you had this thing that hit that I don't know if very few people saw coming, and if they did see it, they didn't see it in the severity that it happened. And George Bush said, "I don't want to go down as Herbert Hoover," and he matter of fact, the subtext of that is, "I don't want to go down like my dad, who lost primarily against Clinton because he didn't recognize that the economy was bad, or he didn't recognize how the perception of it being bad." And so he took, lots of government action. He delegated a lot to Paulson, for better or worse, and it's been a long time since we've had a really good Secretary of the Treasury, and I would say that included now. But Paulson was the guy, and he was, everybody loved Goldman Sachs at the time. Goldman Sachs was the gold standard, and he turned it over to him, and it became, very un-Republican, unconservative in the interference with markets, but that's what happened, and that's where the ball started.
Frank?
The public is mad as hell. They're mad because they feel like they played by the rules. They had their jobs. They raised their kids the right way. They sent their kids to college. They assumed that they could invest, they could put money in the market, and that they would be able to retire with a decent amount saved up. And then they start looking at it, and you all, because you guys are Penn people, how many of you have lost at least 20% of your savings in the last year? Raise your hands.
Oh,
How many
yeah.
of you have lost? How many of you? How many of you? How many of you?
Mayor, how are you?
How many of you
Mayor
have
Nutter
lost? Oh, I just let me finish.
Mayor Nutter has the good sense to walk in on an applause line, I'll just tell you.
How many of you have lost 30% or more? Who's lost 40% or more?
It's
Raise
like
your
the,
hands at 40%.
it's like the Price is Right.
Has anyone lost 45%? Did you go to Wharton? What the hell? So when a Wharton grad can lose that much money, you know that you're in trouble. And so the public looks at that and says that I got a raw deal. That's why they hate politicians. That's why they hate CEOs. And they see people in Wall Street, including a few in this room, still collecting your bonuses while they themselves are trying to pick up the financial pieces. And the reason why Obama's done so well is because he empathizes. He is an amazing communicator. You have to give him credit for this. When you look at the two people who went before him, Gore and Kerry, John Kerry looked like the tree that threw apples at Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I saved these for you. Is anyone here from New Mexico? Is anyone here from New Mexico? Tomorrow is the 64th anniversary of Area 51, where the aliens supposedly landed Roswell, New Mexico. Did you know that exactly 9 months to the day that the aliens landed, Al Gore was born? And so you've got Obama different from that, and so people feel like he's giving them hope, he's giving them opportunity, he's giving them a reason to believe in the future.
Mayor Nutter, you must wonder exactly what you walked into.
I signed up for this?
Yeah, right. This is Friday afternoon of the Improv.
Right.
No, quite serious.
Thought it was Friday afternoon at Steinberg Dietrich.
Just to fill you in on, to give you the Cliff Notes version of
Yeah.
what we've talked about so far. Question was first, what was the election of 2008 ultimately about? Economy, past, present, or past or future? And then my question that you just walked in on that Frank was entertaining us with was the mood out there, what you hear, what you see, and how you respond to that. And you're the one on the hot seat here. You're the, with all due respect to our friends here, the advisors can advise, but somebody's got to decide, and that's you. So,
Yeah.
in Philadelphia and beyond, what do you hear, what do you see among your constituents, and how do you respond?
David, thank you. Brian, thank you. And Frank, I'm not sure. But it's, no, Frank, thank you. I know them both by reputation. I've never met them before, but it's an honor to be on the panel with both of you. I just wish I'd been here from the start. Pleased to be with you this afternoon. Sorry I was running a little late, just coming from an event. 21 people just graduated from a weatherization training program, courtesy of economic recovery opportunities. And it's 21 folks are going to be on their path to recovering themselves in this crazy environment. It's pretty ugly out there. Philadelphia's unemployment rate is now up over 9%. We have law firms laying off lawyers, telling associates, folks who just signed on not to come to work, give them a stipend, and they've told them to go and do good somewhere, and we'll catch up with you next year. Folks were pretty upset about some of the things we did last year. Weren't actually all that excited about some of the things we were trying to do this year because it's a pretty short conversation. We have no money, and there's not a whole lot you can do if you don't have any money. So there's a lot of nervousness out there. Folks are worried about their jobs. I heard the question as I came in about folks with losing their savings. I think it's probably still true that the savings rate in the country, of course, has gone up, not so much because Americans suddenly decided that they wanted to be savers, but that they're worried that they may lose their job, and so they've, to some extent, stopped spending. And they are worried about losing their job, and so they want to hold on to their savings as much as possible. This reminds me, of course, of listening to Colbert one night, who posed the question to someone and said, "Is your money safe or is it in a bank?" I think there's a whole lot of money under mattresses right about now. So it's a tough environment out there. Every mayor across the country is experiencing the same thing. It's tougher to be popular when you're cutting services, closing down programs, and raising people's taxes. It's a lot easier to be popular when you're kind of spending money, making people happy, and life is going along in a happy-go-lucky fashion. So we're experiencing that certainly here in Philadelphia, but we're going to get through it. The Recovery Act and its provisions are going to help us a great deal. But it won't stop us, when I say as mayors, from making tough decisions. President Obama is not sending a check for us to deposit in our treasuries. He's sending money to help put people to work. We'll eventually get their taxes when they go back to work. But in the meantime, we're going to have to make some tough decisions, make some cuts, and tighten our belts. So,
Let me take up the question that you alluded to, Mayor Nutter, which is that it's always struck me that a lot of the challenge and opportunity of leadership is creating a sense of confidence in people about their future. And their confidence in the economy, maybe in political leadership, has certainly been tested this last year or so. So let me turn to our advisors here, and then I'll get your thoughts. How does what you say, and what do you say to people that can inspire a sense of confidence? And what do you do? I mean, you know, the job of a mayor and certainly of a president is a good part reliant on your symbolic acts and your presence and your visibility and so forth. So advisors, what would you advise this mayor or this president or governors to do and say that creates a sense of confidence?
You owe me some money, we're just settling.
If you go back to the Great Depression and you look at the difference between Hoover and FDR, there's a lot of revisionism now about whether FDR's policies really, how much they helped in the Depression versus whether he did enough or whatever. But there's no question that he got the American people through it. He did it by radio. All of you remember radio? That used to be. And his fireside chats. And he inspired confidence. And he inspired the fact that we could look to the future, and the future would be better than it is now. And that, I think, is largely responsible for his legacy and for getting us out of the Great Depression, as opposed to some of the policies. Now, Hoover was a downer, a dour guy. He could make the trains run on time. He was a very, very good Secretary of Commerce before he became president. But he had no ability to inspire confidence with the American people. And Roosevelt was just the opposite. At the present time, Barack Obama is absolutely terrific at that, I think. And he's no question in my mind that he's the right person for the job at the moment. And whether the policies will work is something else. And I think Frank would confirm this. In most pollsters now, there's a Barack Obama has huge approval numbers. I don't know what, 60, 70, something like that. Very high for this period in post 100 days. But the policies aren't doing so well. There's a big gap between I agree with his policies and I agree with Barack Obama as an inspirational leader. So it's very important. Obviously, the gap can't get too big, or it catches up with you eventually. But right now, he's doing great.
Frank, let me just push you a little bit, because you're a word guy. You're the word guy, and I want you to get a little more granular, to sort of dip into your bag of words as you would advise a mayor, a governor, a president. And what are the words that you use?
I look at the difference between Obama and Joe Biden, the senator from nearby Delaware, vice president. Obama is always talking about what's going to happen, what good things will happen. It'll take time over the months and years to follow. Biden tells everyone, don't go out, don't be in an enclosed place. Biden is the reason why Amtrak created the quiet car. See, now the problem is we're only halfway done and I'm totally out of jokes right now. I'll give you a word, and the word is imagine. It is the most powerful word in the English language, because imagine puts the communication in your perspective rather than ours. If I asked you to imagine the American dream, a friend of mine over there, Brian Becker, who was the Quaker when I was here, his son will be going to this school starting in the fall. For him, the American dream is that his son gets the chance to attend this incredible institution, which is, by the way, so much better than we were here. So you have no idea. And one other point, this institution is bankrupting your parents, so you better be. So that imagine is all in your perspective. Imagine the American dream. Imagine life at perfection. Imagine how much your children can accomplish if they learn, if they are excited, if they are taught with people with passion and with inspiration. When you focus on that word imagine with passion and inspiration, you can take the most negative fear and turn it into a positive and get people. And this is where, frankly, Barack Obama is so good. His speech at the convention was remarkable. And I'm supposed to be on the other side, and I'm tearing up during it because of the symbolism and because of the power. And he also used a word, the negative word. He described all the things that George Bush had done, and then he said one word to end the conversation, move towards the future. Enough. He said enough. And everyone, 95,000 people all looked at each other and nodded. That's the power of language. A single word communicates so much more than tens of thousands of words.
Mayor Nutter, you, I would guess, have this challenge day in, day out, 8, 10 times a day. Easy. Communicating to constituents, your former colleagues on council, state legislators, communication one-on-one. So how do you think through that challenge these days?
It was interesting listening to our two advisors about the gap between how people feel about you personally and what's going on in the current situation. I've experienced some of that myself, and you're absolutely right. You don't want the gap to grow too wide. But what I've apparently gotten good marks for from the public is that not only do they believe that I'm honest, but also that I'm tackling the tough issues that have needed to be tackled for some time, but have been pushed off by others. And so there was some poll done by someone. The public has figured out that, at least here in Philadelphia, that I did not create the international economic crisis by myself. And so, I get, in this particular case, you want very low marks for, is the mayor responsible for the economic situation in Philadelphia? I mean, it's like, 2%. I'd love to meet them, just so I could query them as to what do you think I did, and then higher marks for either personality or just taking on the tough issues. No one's going to like many of the things that we have to do, and so a lot of our communication has been around this is where we're trying to get to. We believe that the next year or two, year and a half or two, are going to be very, very tough. This is our plan to get to the other side of this. These are the steps we're taking right now to deal with it. We're not asking anybody for any more money. We're going to handle our business here at home on our own, and that we're all in this together. So I talk about vulnerable populations. I talk about why we need to do the things that we need to do, and that this will come to an end in a very short time. Now, I don't know when it's going to come to an end, and the president doesn't seem to know exactly when it's going to come to an end. And I tell folks, if anyone tells you they know when it's going to come to an end, the best thing for you to do is get away from them as quickly as possible. They're probably about to burst into flames. So you have to give. I think you have to give folks not only a sense of the vision, but some definition to where we are. How long do you think it's going to last? And your actions are built around a certain amount of time frame. And ultimately, it is again about the confidence that you have to exhibit that you know what's going on, you have a plan to attack it, and the future is going to be better. But we have to stick together to make it happen. I mean, that's a lot of the
Great.
conversation I have.
We have to, as we're talking about language and mood and tone, we have to talk about what seems like a more and more endangered species, and that's the Republican Party. So my question particularly to Frank and to Bob, because Mayor Nutter, there are probably 2 more Republicans on this panel than maybe you've seen in the last 6 weeks or so here in Philadelphia.
Yeah,
So you can take a bye
I
on this.
I noticed you
like.
had to import some.
But Bob and Frank, what do you say to the Republican Party, the National Party? And you know, there wasn't a time, wasn't too long ago. You go back to the mid '90s when you had some really good Republican mayors, Giuliani or Reardon in Los Angeles. Looks to me like the Republican Party is kind of like the Wile E. Coyote coming off the cliff and spinning the wheels real hard trying to find some traction. What do you say to recapture and reorganize and talk to people in meaningful ways again?
Well, I'm even worse. I'm a San Francisco Republican. Talk about an endangered species. Actually, to make it even
We're
worse,
4.5 to 1 here, if you can beat that.
I'm a San Francisco Jewish Republican.
We vague.
Right now, the party's going through the same kind of turmoil that all losing parties go through when they get wiped out two elections in a row. Soul searching, which way do we go? I just moved to a new house and I'm cleaning out all my memorabilia, and I found an op-ed page from the Washington Post that was done in 1977. Actually, I'm not even sure they called them op-eds then, but it was just after Carter was elected, and Carter had overwhelming majorities when he was elected in 1976. And on the editorial page, the first half was, now that the Democrats have responsibility for everything, the House, the Senate, the presidency, what are they going to do? The bottom article was about which way for the Republicans, left or right. Now, things don't change very much. And when the Democrats get wiped out, they go through the same soul searching post-McGovern. That led to ultimately to the Democrat Leadership Council, which was a group of centrist Democrats about bringing the party back to the center, and that's where Bill Clinton emerged and so on. So right now I would say we're leaderless. We're going through which way do we go? Conservatives, certainly talk radio thinks that if McCain had only been more conservative, that he might have won, and we've got to stick to our principles. Then there's the big tent school that says, this is crazy. That's, the moderates and the 3 that are left in the Senate, or 2 now, I guess.
We took one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll be back.
10 little Indians.
But so do we? We just got wiped out, and Frank can talk about this forever, but demographically in the last election, young people, minorities, and so on. I mean, it doesn't look good for the future, but again, the biggest wipeout that I can remember, which was in 1964 when Goldwater ran against Lyndon Johnson, and that's when, Republicans first stuck to their conservative principles and lost, 47 states or something. 4 years later, we had the White House. So I think the future it's a pendulum, and right now the Democrats have it, but, I'm not that worried about what's going to happen in the next 20 years.
Right?
I don't know. I look at, and this is where I'm going to get into real trouble. I look at the Republicans who ran for president and those who are the leaders. Newt Gingrich became so unpopular, the Unabomber had a higher favorability rating than him. Mike Huckabee reminded people of Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. Mitt Romney looked just like the guy in the Levitra ad. Are you on Levitra? And Rudy Giuliani, who I worked for in New York in 93 and 97, ran the worst campaign ever for president. This guy ended the campaign with more wives than delegates. The challenge for the Republican Party, and that, by the way, is the one that's going to cause me to have a dead horse in my bed someday. The challenge for the Republican Party, you think I'm kidding. The challenge for the Republican Party is to, number one, find people to reach out to 20-somethings because, my God, Obama, when he did this thing, thank God I didn't miss. He did that with his wife, and from that, Obama did that with his wife, and they were coming up in Wisconsin when he was accepting, when he finally won, they did the fist pump. First off, Fox News, one of the Fox News commentators, which I work for, and I'm very proud of, but one of them said it could have been a terrorist symbol. What are you, a moron? I do speeches for CEOs, and some 68-year-old guy who is the CEO of a major electronics company said Obama must have cancer because he can't shake hands. So problem number one is they can't reach out to 20-somethings. Problem number two is the Latino community. They dropped from 37% down to 27%. This is Arizona. This is New Mexico. This is Texas. This is California. Problem number three is the African-American community. Now, there's nothing that the GOP can do as long as Obama's president because there is something special and something historic about his election. But even before that, Republicans could reach out to them. And it's not about selling out your principles. It's not about moving to the left or to the right. It's opening yourself up so that people decide to join you rather than you trying to pull them in. You know, I look at the Republican Party, and they're just so gosh darn old. With all due respect to the old people in this room.
I think, you know, I've never seen someone self-destruct so quickly. I think you've now insulted everyone in the room, and I've only been here 15 minutes. I mean, what were you doing before I got here?
I was criticizing you for being late.
Oh, you will pay for that, let me assure you.
No, I am not a constituent. I will not pay for that.
Well, let's see, guys. Let me pick up on Frank's. I'm trying
No, just
my
what you're
best
sitting.
here. Let me pick up on Frank's last comment, one of the several laugh lines. No, this question of the let's call it the youth vote shorthand. No news to anybody, no pun intended, that the so-called legacy media is virtually gone in that segment, right? My kids don't listen, don't read the newspaper, don't listen to the radio. If you look at the numbers, nobody in that demographic does. So how's that changing the job of communicating to for elected officials and for you, those of you that advise them? What do you say? How do you make your choices? Where do you spend your money? I mean, there are pockets where, you know, probably Philadelphia being one of them, where still a lot of people watch network television and listen to the radio and so forth, but it's, you know, the Inquirer filed for Chapter 11, and that's more to come. So what do you say? How do you make sense of the tools at your disposal? Jump ball.
I think if you go back to television as the driver, which started actually in the Eisenhower-Stevenson election of '52, when television first became a factor. But it was always network television. I mean, if you didn't get on network television, the big three, you just weren't on. And of course, the viewing habits of this country have changed so much. So it went from network to spot television to cable to to alternative media, and yet. Television certainly is not dead. I mean, the internet's extremely important. It's certainly a great fundraising tool. We'll see how Obama uses it to rally his base on important issues, because he's got just an enormous database there. But you know, I think every campaign advisor is still saying that if you can't raise the money to get on television, don't bother to run.
Frank or Mayor Nutter?
I want to own the web. 13 million email addresses Obama has, and it's still growing. Republicans have 1.5 million. And it'll take them, based on how fast they're getting email addresses, they'll catch up with them in the year 2099. Most of you will be dead by then. And even if they had that, I'm just as interested in the tone as I am in the medium,
Yeah.
because you can reach them. You can reach them there's so many different ways to reach them, so many easy ways to target them, but if you've got no message and you've got no rationale for them to connect to you, what good is it if you do connect to them?
Yeah. Mayor Nutter, go back to the primary, because let's just
Yeah.
acknowledge your general election was a bit of a cakewalk, 83-17. But how'd you make some of the critical choices? Because you were, let's acknowledge, behind in the pack. And
Behind.
a late surge. Your daughter helped a lot.
I was at the end of the pack.
Well, I was trying to be charitable.
Yeah, it was nice.
So how did you make your choices about the medium?
I think much as Bob said, and especially for a local election, and I mean we were, at least in the city, I mean the whole internet communication, the things that you could do was still kind of evolving. I mean, I will admit that when I announced that I was running in the summer of 2006, I'm not sure at that moment that I actually knew what a blog was. I mean, I heard it, didn't completely understand it, didn't know what it was about. I mean, some younger people on the campaign finally explained it to me, and then we got into, Facebook, and now there's Twitter. I don't exactly still understand what Twitter's about. I think I know what Facebook is about. People ask me, do I have a Facebook page? And by the look on my face, they usually know that the technical answer is yes, but I've never actually seen it. I don't know what it does, but someone operates it. So for us locally, I mean, it is about television. And the critical decision was actually relatively simple. In a mayor's race in Philadelphia, which is the biggest race in the 4-year cycle, except sometimes president, but I mean people take the mayor's race seriously here. It costs approximately $300,000 a week to have any significant impact on television. Mayor's race is a TV race, and you're either on or you're not. You're either communicating or you're not. And then we did some other stuff as we generated more money. Being on TV helped us raise more money, and 4 to 5 hours a day. Calling up people that I did not know and begging them for money, that helped as well. So the equation was pretty simple. It's $300,000 times, or it's the money you have divided by $300,000 says when you can go on TV. And we pretty much had a good sense of what we were going to have, and we ended up, I think we were on for about 8 weeks or so, but that was really the calculus.
Yeah.
And we made a second decision, or a simultaneous decision, that once we went on, we would never come down. So we had to know that when we went up, we were going to have enough money. The one thing, I guess I kind of instinctively knew this, but it really confronts you. TV is not like buying some other good. You actually have to give them the money first before they will run your stuff.
And you're buying air, of course.
You're buying air, and you have to give it to them before they run it, and there's a certain day that you have to give it to them by, because there's a whole cycle. So I think it's like Tuesday. If you don't have the money in on Monday, your stuff is not running. You can be a nice guy, I have a lot of money, you know where I live, doesn't matter. Wired in the account, we run. No money, no ads. So, it's pretty straightforward, and at $300,000 a clip, it goes pretty quickly. We had some great ads, but I also worked pretty hard too.
The networks are still trying to collect from Hubert Humphrey's.
Is that why they're so stringent? Yeah. Okay, so it's
let's
Triple H's fault.
Let's double back to the kind of the economic side of the equation for a second. Mayor Nutter, you know that you've got some tough choices coming up just in the next couple months, labor contracts, budget. Your constituents, you're going to ask to make tough choices. The American people have tough choices, certainly relative to healthcare reform. All of this talk about the internet and communication and tone and so forth, are people any better prepared to make tough choices today than at any point?
What I can tell you is that when I announced, I had the. It's really kind of crazy when I think back on it. We were in the moment, so we didn't. There was not much we could do about it. I announced back last September. We didn't know how bad things were going to get. I mean, I think that the economic crisis, absolutely, this is my opinion. These guys get paid for their opinion. But as a more than casual observer, I mean, I think that when the economic crisis hit, about the third week or so in September, caused one candidate to suspend the campaign, the other, and Senator Obama was, kind of quiet and let me see what's really going on here. I mean, I think that changed the course of this, of that election, may have changed the course of history. We were noticing during the summer last year that something was going on in the economy because our tax revenues were continuing to decline even as early as July. And then came August, and then I announced on September 11th last year, this just happened to be the date, that the city was facing a $450 million 5-year deficit, and we knew it was growing. So we used language to be honest with people, and we said at least 450 in order to allow us to be honest and truthful because we knew it was going to get worse. In October, I told the Philadelphians that the number had grown to between, again, to give us some breathing room, between 650 and 850. At the same time, the Philadelphia Phillies were on their way through the playoffs and potentially on to win the World Series. Take that. I told you it was.
Not anymore.
Right. I told you it was coming back at you. And so that's going on. Then we have the most historic election in possibly any of our respective lifetimes. That's happening. And we had to push our announcements back because I now knew that we had $1 billion deficit. And so the parade was on October 31st. Barack Obama gets elected November 4th. That's my recollection. And on November 6th, 2 days after the most historic election in the history of the United States of America, I stood in front of a camera and told Philadelphians that we had a $1 billion 5-year plan deficit. You talk about being the life of the party. So and people could not understand what was going on. We had a bunch of town hall meetings, 8 of them, just to show you how insane I am. And let the public come out and holler and scream at me about some of the things that we were doing. And a lady stood up and said, Mayor, who stole the money? She was serious as a heart attack. I burst out laughing. I mean, I just, try to be serious at these things, but I mean, it's only so much you can take. So at that time, people could not understand what in the world was going on, what had happened, why do we not have any money, why are we closing, this center, that center, cutting services, laying people off, et cetera, et cetera. President Obama actually has helped me and helped us to communicate it because if the president says things are going to get worse before they get better, the Philadelphians here in the audience may have heard me say that a few times. And so 8 months later, I think people do have a much better sense of what's going on. They do know that they're going to have to make some sacrifices. They do know that it's a national, international economic crisis, not created by any of us mere mortals on the ground, and that at this point, having a job is better than not having a job. And you hear very little talk, serious talk, about anybody wanting raises, and I want more of this, and I want more of that, I want more of the other thing. Now, in a union contract negotiation, of course, you have to ask. But I think everyone knows that there is no money. And the best way for you to keep your job is to not ask for any more, unless we have to make more cuts.
Frank, Bob, any comment on that question?
On Christmas Day, we will hit 10% in unemployment if you don't hit it before then. We were doing work back in September. We were doing work back in September, and we saw that this was going to be an awful Christmas. We put out the first poll that said that it was actually going to have a decrease in consumption. And we were criticized because even after 9/11, it actually still went up slightly. And I said, no way. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is going to be the worst Christmas in modern times because there is no extra money, and still we are losing 500,000 jobs a month. At one time, it was as high as 17,000 jobs a day. And while the amount that we're losing is decreasing, it is not as dramatic as it was. It is still significant, and we're going up 0.3, 0.4, 0.5% every month. And even though the public thinks that the economy is getting better, I will show you something. How many of you believe that you have a better quality of life than your parents when they were your age? If your quality of life is better than your parents, raise your hands. How many of you truly believe that your children will have a better quality of life than you when they get to be your age? Look at how few hands go up. That's the rub right now. That's what the mayor and the president and the elected officials have to address. For the first time in American history, the sense of intergenerational improvement has been broken. The promise that every generation would have it better than the previous generation. And the sacrifices that our parents did for us, that we are expected to do for our children, won't be enough. And that's the rub, that's the negativity, and that's where we are hoping that our political leaders, our corporate leaders, will be able to work together across partisan lines to find a solution so that our kids will have the same opportunities that we had when they get to be our age.
I think leadership is about or confidence, and I think the mayor exudes that, and I think the president now exudes that. But let me give you an example of somebody who had that but no longer has it, and that's my governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, he won in a recall election, was overwhelmingly reelected 2 years ago. And next Tuesday in California, there's a special election, and it's about reforming the budget. I mean, California, they say, always leads the way. Well, we don't want to, if you guys are from not from California, you don't want to lead the way we are leading, because we are in a huge budget mess. We're in a legislative impasse between the governor and the Democrats in the legislature, and despite Arnold's smoking tent, it's not helping very much. And so it's gone on the ballot, because that's what happens in California. When the legislature can't resolve anything, it goes on the ballot. So we often have 10, 20 propositions to vote on, both local and state. And we've got 4 or 5 to vote on next Tuesday. I don't know what the turnout's going to be, about 2%, but these are very important in terms of reform. They're all going to go down, and they're going to go down because I don't think people have any confidence anymore in the governor, and they certainly don't have it in the legislature. And I'm not sure what's going to happen as a result of that, except that there's going to be, more cuts and more borrowing. I mean, we're supposed, like every other state, we're supposed to have a balanced budget. That's part of the charter, but it's not going to happen. So here's somebody who was that. I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, people were talking about amending the Constitution so Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was obviously not born here, could run for the President of the United States. And today, he's, fighting off the dogs nipping at his heels for that. So you can have confidence and you can say the right things, and he continues to say the right things. But if they're not believed by the public, it doesn't matter what you're saying. I mean, and how much conviction you have when you're saying them, because once you lose that, I don't think you get it back.
On that happy note, let's open this up to the audience and take your questions for either individual panelists or for the whole, and see if we can generate a few more laugh lines. How about that? Yes, sir.
Well, I was wondering whether Bob and Frank can give some advice to either to the mayor or to, and how do you present or how do you advocate very tough decisions? So, for example, in your California example, where you have both spending cuts and possible raising taxes, what do you advise candidates to do? If you're, Frank, you had a memo regarding healthcare. Assuming that you were on the other side and you wanted to present those difficult choices, what type of wording, what type of strategies do you give elected officials in doing things which are simply unpopular?
The first thing you do is you look people straight in the eye. It's one of the things that's very tough because I absolutely refuse to have notes whenever I do presentations. And it means I got to keep trying to follow it in my head. But I want to make sure that I'm always looking everyone in the eye, not reading something. You know, Obama reads a teleprompter really well. You feel like he means it. John McCain, Stevie Wonder reads a teleprompter better than John. So number one is you look people straight in the eye. Number two is that you engage in those town hall meetings that you did. You've got to give people a chance to vent. And here's the secret to this. You don't invite people to ask you questions. You ask them questions. If the mayor goes and asks half a dozen questions and starts pointing at people, what would you do in this situation? Everyone feels empowered. Everyone feels like they've had a chance to contribute. I always try to say this to politicians. They go into classrooms and they read to the little kids and they think they're doing great. Wrong. You have the kids read to you. And then parents are so proud of that. Number three is that you lower expectations. If you tell people things are going to be solved overnight, they won't believe you, they won't trust you, and so they won't follow you. Number four is you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, and you empower them to tell you when you're full of it. Because that's often what happens. That's what happened in the last administration. No one could tell Bush anything, and that was a huge mistake. And then the last thing is you give people measurable results again and again, every month, if it's going up, if it's going down, because then they'll feel a sense of accountability. They'll feel that you're able to see whether you're making progress. And I'll tell you, Obama's following most of that in how he's handling it so far.
Any other takers on that question, Bob or?
I think great political leaders have an ability to frame and simplify the issues. And a lot of these are complex. I mean, the California issue that I referred to is a very complex issue. It's not as simple as solving Social Security, which is either to cut benefits or raise taxes. Those are really only the two answers. It's much more complicated than that. But the people that are really successful in the political business know how to do that, whether it's instinctive or learned. But that's what makes them stand out from the crowd.
See, yes, sir, here.
Mayor Nutter, Frank's book talks a lot about the difference between words that are spoken and then words that are heard, and the difference there. You have a very interesting regional situation where you have a city, but you have the suburbs that you don't need them to vote for you, but you certainly need their support and their cooperation. When you're speaking, how conscious are you of the difference between the way city people hear what you say and what suburban people hear what you say?
I'm very conscious. I assume anywhere, I assume if I'm speaking first of all, anywhere I'm speaking in the tri-state area, I assume that everyone in the tri-state area at some point in time, if they want to, or if they just happen to be walking past the TV or see a newspaper laying out, I'm always speaking to the region whenever I'm talking. And I spend a lot of time in the region. I was in Delaware County just the other day. I'm trying to form modeled on what Mayor Daley did in Chicago with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. I'm now trying to form a Metropolitan Caucus of the leaders of Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery counties, and Philly. So I always assume that I'm speaking to the region when I'm talking. And more specifically, it was one of the reasons, although I thought it was a bad policy idea in the first place, it was one of the reasons why I was so against raising the wage tax. To solve our problem here, because not only was it a tax on Philadelphians who don't need that kind of circumstance, it was also a tax on all of our suburban residents who work in the city. And so as I'm in the process of asking Harrisburg to give me relief with regard to raising the sales tax or pension fund relief, I'm also inadvertently taxing their constituents at the same time. Not a good political situation for me or for us. So I'm always assuming that I'm talking to multiple audiences at the same time.
By the way, it's not just words, it's also visuals. And one of the things we start to look at is the power of the visual. When Barack Obama did all of his primary nights celebrations, even the ones where he lost, what we found is, because we studied what people looked at, we studied their eye patterns, that they would spend almost 80% of the time looking at the faces behind him and only 20% looking at him. And it really looked like America. It looked like a genuine rainbow coalition. The most powerful visuals are either people or things that promote pride and patriotism. The number one in this country right now is the Statue of Liberty. When people see it, they think American pride and patriotism. Where was the Statue of Liberty made? And yet we think it is American. And she's, got one arm up with the torch. When I think of the French, I kind of think so.
I say, yes, ma'am, on the wall there.
Yes, ma'am. Hey, how are you, Lily?
How do you manage the process of the changes that you wanted to implement, such as greening and some of the initiatives in the face of economic calamity? How do you keep people sort of feeling positive about the things you came in that you wanted to do?
Repeat the question.
Sure. I think, yeah, it's how do you stay focused on the priorities? Maybe you laid out the green economy was what Lolita was talking about, and kind of gets sideswiped by you're talking about the economic crisis. How do you stay focused on the things that you're doing? Well, amazingly, especially on green, we've been able to maintain that focus. Just announced our GreenWorks Philadelphia plan in the last 2 weeks. We put these big belly trash compactors, solar powered, made an announcement about that. I mean, some of these things were already in the works. Dollars had already been allocated, and we just made a decision that I wasn't cutting back on some of those priorities, and we made cuts in other places. So there seems to be there's a little bit of thought out there. I get commentators say to me, "Oh, it's a shame what's happened," and you've kind of gotten off stride with a lot of things that you wanted to do. And I said, "Well, you must have missed the press event about this, or were you not paying attention?" I mean, we're still doing what we had planned to do in many instances. Some we've had to slow down on a little bit. Maybe we're not as far along as we would have liked to have been. But you can't get you just can't listen to all that chatter out there. I mean, I know where we're trying to go, and if we manage our dollars right, keep communicating with the public, and maintain our priorities, we're going to get there. But maybe not as quickly as I'd like to.
Let me tag on to that question for a second, particularly for Frank and for Bob. Go back to Obama and a lot of reflection on the first 100 days, and what I'll say is sort of the sheer audacity of the agenda. Not a day goes by where seemingly, all issues, all problems, all challenges, there's a new agenda item that's rolled out. A good move in that it creates a sense of energy and momentum, or a bad move in that it communicates a diffuse message to the American people about what you really care about?
I think it's the only move. If you don't get it done, get it going right away, it's never going to happen. So I think he's doing the right thing, and then there's the communication part of that, and I think he's doing as well as he can on that. But administrations have to move really quickly while they have the goodwill to do it, and the congressional support, and you can always see that beginning to erode both on the left and the right in some of the programs. No, I think it's exactly the right thing.
Frank?
And you've seen, and I've taken a pretty pro-Obama approach here. This is the one place where I don't. There's only so much we can afford. There's only so much we can spend. There are a few kids here that may be coming to Penn next semester, and you come with your parents here. I know how much this is going to cost. Part of my education was to study Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid and the programs, and the government says it only costs $10 billion, and it ends up within 5 years costing $100 billion. I know this is the government that should have helped people in Katrina, and it was absolutely pathetic. That this is the government that said Freddie and Fannie could be bailed out with a few $1 billion. If you read the Wall Street Journal today,
Yeah.
it's another, between them, it's another $22 billion, and there's no end in sight. At what point do you say we have to stop? We can't afford it anymore. Believe in the cause of health care. People need to be covered.
Yeah.
But at some point, enough is enough.
I was going to say, there goes that word enough again.
Well, that is the difference between local government and federal government.
It's called a balanced budget, right? In the back row, yes, ma'am.
They print them.
You used the word bipartisan. Do you think in this current climate that there's such a thing as a bipartisan answer to some
not used to that.
Yeah.
Unions. No. It is very. They say if you drive, if your politics are how you drive, and you politics in the middle of the road, you drive in the middle of the road, you get run over on both sides. It is really hard. Republicans get jammed by Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck if they say something nice about Obama. If the Democrats say something nice about a Republican approach, they get jammed by MoveOn.org and other organizations like that. It is so hard, and sometimes mayors are freed from having to play that game. But there are so few people that have, and I'll give one example who I think is one of my favorite people in politics. I'm very fortunate to have known him, and I'm proud of him, and that's Joe Lieberman, senator from Connecticut. He almost lost his career over it, and we'll see what happens in his re-election campaign. No, we talk bipartisanship, but that's not how it works in Washington. It's not how it works in any state. Ask Ed Rendell. There's no cooperation here in Pennsylvania. In the city government in New York, there's no cooperation. And it's sad, because in the end, we're more interested in scoring political points than we are in getting the job done.
Let's see. Yes, ma'am, back here.
I think that politics is always related to the economy, and that people, the majority of the populace is willing to be lied to as long as their house value is going up and their retirement looks secure, and they think that their kids are going to be upwardly mobile. And when the bottom falls out of that, that's when everything changes, and that this is the time for honest leaders, not politicians so much as leaders who are willing to say, this is the way it is, it's going to be hard, we're going to get through it together. And I think that there's a lot to be said for leaders who have come up through the meritocracy, who understand, like Mayor Nutter, like President Obama, who understand the ramifications of their decisions on people's lives, and yet are still willing to make those hard decisions, and who are smart and well-educated. And I just think that this is a very special, unique time for leaders that we are very lucky to have.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate the compliment. And the flip of that, and kind of a little bit of what Frank said a second ago, kind of the different kind of town hall meeting. I mean, what I've been confronted with is people have told me, I mean, this is a little bit of the, Jack Nicholson, I'm forgetting the name of the movie. No,
5 Easy Pieces?
No. Tom Cruise and so
Few Good
men or women. People said, I ran on reform. I ran on, we're going to clean up the government. We're going to, operate with integrity, transparency, and openness. We did that and almost got our heads taken off. And so folks say they want us to tell the truth. And I'm going to tell the truth anyway. And then you end up suffering, to some extent, the consequences, which is a reminder to all the other politicians or elected officials why maybe you don't tell the truth. And just try to kind of get by and then deal with the truth later on when it's a little more comfortable or convenient. So folks say they want to hear the truth, but when it really comes kind of raining down on them, they go berserk sometimes. And so there's a tension there, and you're always trying to figure out, I want to lay out the situation, but if you're really worried, fortunately for me, I quit my job once to run. I left city council, went out on this, big limb, 5th place for most of the campaign. If something were to happen, I think I have some skills. I can find another job. A lot of folks in public service, I'll just kind of say it here. It is absolutely the best job they're ever going to have in life. And so in this business, if you can just not do anything bad, not steal, don't get in trouble, you can hold these jobs for a long, long period of time versus taking tough stands, taking tough votes, telling the public the truth, and risk what is now, maybe you've got your kid at Penn, maybe you got a big house, you've got this, you've got obligations, blah, 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 and putting all of that on the line for some folks is a pretty scary proposition. And so the public says they want us to tell them the truth, but when we do, it is often a different story, at the polling place. It's very interesting watching that dynamic.
You find that to be true, Frank? Is there a, say one thing and demand?
Person to ask, because I become very cynical in the process. I lived in Washington, D.C., and I moved to L.A. or moving to L.A. right now because I've had enough. And I finally gave up. I wanted to have these conversations and discussions. I don't know if there's a reporter in this room, because if there is, I know that by Monday, comments I made will be on the blogs. By Tuesday, Rush Limbaugh will do a 5-minute rip on me. But I don't look at the politicians, I look at the people. And I want one segment of the population that gets so forgotten, the American dream, which to me is the most important concept. The definition for Americans now is financial success. Freedom is now fourth. There's one group that picks home ownership as number one, bless you. The Latino community, the Hispanic community, to them that's the definition. You may, Anheuser-Busch, I don't know how many of you speak Spanish, but Anheuser-Busch, to relate to this, did the most wonderful ad about this young Latino girl. She's leaving home for the last time. She's got a suitcase under one arm, she's got a plant under another, and she's in tears because she's leaving home and her parents are crying, her husband's crying. So she goes out the door, shuts it behind her, goes down the stairs into the street, across the street, up the stairs to the house right across the street from hers, goes to the refrigerator, grabs a Budweiser and says, "Mi casa." For the Latino household, that is the definition of the American dream. I'm Jewish. Living across the street from my mother would be the American
Too much. Okay, I'm watching the clock. I know you all have lots of folks to catch up with coming up to cocktail time. I'm going to take one question. I know you've been wanting to ask one.
Mr. Mayor, you've never been a member at any time of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, correct?
Correct.
Definitely.
Are you now, or have you ever?
I was trying to figure out which group I was not members
Okay, so you're not responsible for the crisis.
No.
With the panel
It was
like
at
a
my
comment on loose Fed policy in 2001, after 9/11, and how it drove the housing bubble with the allowing the interest on the loan, and then Fed tightening, what politician other than picking the Federal Reserve chairman ever exerts any influence over Fed policy?
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, as Barack Obama once said, that's above my pay grade.
I'd rather not, could you not try not to dodge this question? This is a good one. Can we talk about Fed policy and how it affected the economy?
Maybe that can wait for
above my
cocktail hour.
I have no idea.
Well, listen.
I fill potholes.
We'll get a special exception rule on that. Get one more question from the crowd. Yes, ma'am. Is this a joint question or? Oh, okay.
She just said to me, he's not on Levitra. Man, you protest too much.
I have to tell you that we heard you 5 years ago. I think it was when Harry was running. It was much funnier this time.
It's easier when you lose.
Is it my shirt or my hair?
I have a very short comment and then a question that's kind of funny, I guess. But I think I agree with you. I think one problem is that in this country, political parties are considered like football teams. The people who support them like football teams, and the end goal is to win. And I think considering the change in the configuration of this country in the next 50 years, I will not be here, and even Levitra won't change that. But in 50 years, especially because of the emergence of China and India, this country is going to have to have a different face. And I think it's a shame we don't have politicians who can get together and long-term plan for this, especially for the people. But thank you. Now I'm going to run. question is, I hope you don't mind this question, but when I heard that Sarah Palin was going to be the vice presidential nominee, and especially after I read more about her, I thought, somebody is trying to throw the election. And I really want to know who, I mean that, I really know in my mind what their goal was. Who chose Sarah Palin? That's a serious question because I don't believe it was John Kay. Okay,
The Federal Reserve.
I was going to say
Say
David
that one
Letterman.
I'm going to save that for a cocktail hour too. Listen, folks, please join me in thanking these terrific Penn alumni.